The next step for getting ready for virtualization after installing the Hyper-V role would be to configure settings on the Hyper-V server. Now to do this, here in the Server Manager, I'm going to go up to the Tools menu, and provided I've installed the Hyper-V role, which I have on this server, we'll see a tool here called the Hyper-V Manager. This is where the majority of your local virtualization management will take place. Here in the Hyper-V Manager, we can see that host 1 is the name of a computer that is acting as a Hyper-V host. And if I right-click on host 1, you'll see here that there's a selection for Hyper-V settings. Now, there's a number of different settings that we have here. First one right at the top says virtual hard disks. And this setting will specify the default folder location for any virtual hard disk that you create on this particular Hyper-V host. Now you'll see here that it is set to the C drive in a folder called Hyper-V and then a subfolder called virtual hard disks. This was actually set up as part of the Hyper-V role installation. Okay, we had selected that. The next option we have is virtual machines, where we pretty much have the same thing. This setting will specify the default folder location for storing virtual machine configuration files. You'll see here that again we have the default location is just the Hyper-V folder on the C drive, and that is something that again I actually set up as part of the original Hyper-V role installation. Then we have physical GPUs. Now this setting applies to remote desktop virtualization and the VDI implementation. If you want to enable remote FX 3D video adapters in virtual machines, you must install the remote desktop virtualization host role service, and the Hyper-V host must have a physical graphics processing unit or GPU that supports remote FX. So you can see here that everything is grayed out, and the reason why is because it says that the remote desktop virtualization host role service is not installed. Okay, because that's not something we're looking to do here. We're not working with VDI. The next choice is NUMA spanning. Now this setting will allow virtual machines to span across NUMA nodes when CPU or memory resources are needed. So the default setting is to allow spanning. The reason why is because, again, it says can help you run more virtual machines in the same time, and it can also provide virtual machine with more memory than what's available on a single NUMA node. But you need to keep in mind that this setting may decrease overall performance. Okay, so the default is on, but depending on your scenario and the resources that are available, if you know that you have plenty and you don't need to span the NUMA, then you want to go ahead and tell it not to span the physical NUMA nodes for virtual NUMA configuration because you might have performance issues. Next, we have live migrations. Now, this setting defines whether a Hyper-V host can participate in virtual machine live migrations. So now, the setting you can see here is not enabled by default, and it actually could have been enabled as part of the Hyper-V role installation, but I chose to not have it enabled by default. In fact, we're not even going to enable it now because it's something that I'll get into in more detail in a later video. What I will mention real fast here is you'll see that once I enable it, I do have to choose a network that I want to use for the migration of virtual machines from another host. Okay, so I could use any available network. Okay, that takes care of one of my problems. By the way, you'll notice, let me go ahead and show you, there was a warning at the bottom that says incoming live migrations are blocked because no IP addresses are specified. So as soon as I said take any available network, that warning goes away. But I still have an issue here that says I must log off and log on again to use the selected live migration authentication protocol. To change this protocol, it says to expand this page and go to the advanced features page. In other words, I can expand this and then I have advanced features. And right here, because we're using the credential security support provider, okay, which is less secure but simpler, but you also must log on locally to perform the live migration. Again, you have the little warning saying you must log off and log on again. Whereas if I select Kerberos, which is more secure, but also requires some constrained delegation, it does give you some more ability and it's more secure, but there's a little more setup with it. You'll see there that now all my warnings go away. I do also have some performance options available. And again, this gets into more detail, okay, which we'll look at when we get to live migrations. For now, we put everything back where it was, undo it all, we're good to go. The next option here is storage migrations, which controls how many storage migrations can occur simultaneously. It defaults to 2. That again is something that will be covered in another video. Now here's one that I really love, and it's the enhanced session mode policy. All right, and so I do like to check that box. This setting defines whether redirection of local devices and resources to virtual machines is allowed. And what it really does is it allows us to use basically the equivalent of a remote desktop connection. Okay, and I think that it truly, there's no better way to word it than exactly what it's called. It's an enhanced session. Okay, and that's why I do like to enable enhanced sessions on my Hyper-V servers. And then we have replication configuration, which has to do with if we were using this server as a replica server. There's a lot of detail here, okay, which I'm not going to go into right now, but this is how you would configure this Hyper-V server as a replica server. Then we have down here under the user settings, we have keyboard. It says, how do you want to use the Windows key combinations? Things like Alt-Tab. Okay, if you've used Windows anytime, pretty much this century, you know that Alt-Tab is how you switch between programs. Well, what it's asking is, how do you want Alt-Tab to react and other Windows key combinations when running a virtual machine connection? Defaults to saying, oh, well, if I'm in a virtual machine connection, then let's have the keystroke represent, what I'm trying to do on the virtual machine. Or you can say, no, go back and use the physical computer. Or you could say, use the virtual machine, but only if I'm running in full screen. If I'm just in a window, then go back and use it on the host computer. There's a mouse release key, which just has to do with if you don't have the appropriate drivers, you will find that the mouse can get trapped within the virtual machine connection window. So there's a release key that you can set up. It defaults to Control Alt and then the left arrow key. Okay, that would release your mouse to be able to get out of the window. Again, we have our enhanced session mode, which we absolutely want to use, and reset checkboxes. This basically has to do with go ahead and resetting anywhere within the Hyper-V manager if we were to have, one of those screens where you check the box saying, don't show me this again. This is how we can go ahead and reset and undo any of those checkboxes that maybe we've checked. So that's pretty much all the different settings that we have for the Hyper-V server itself. Now, I will tell you that there are more settings that we'll see later on when it comes to the actual virtual machines themselves. But these are the settings that we want to deal with when worrying about configuring the Hyper-V host itself.